Welcome back to another explainer. Look, if you've ever felt like a sales conversation or a client pitch just completely derailed and you had absolutely no idea why, you're going to love what we've got for you today. We're diving straight into a highly structured visual roadmap called Buyer Sense Conversations. It's basically a cheat code that completely demystifies the internal journey your buyer is taking and tells you exactly what you need to do at each step to guide them. It's a fantastic tool, so let's get right into it.
So let's take a look at the complete map of the conversation. Now I know, at first glance, this kind of looks like a complex circuit board, right? But stick with me, because we're going to trace this journey logically from left to right. The most important thing to grasp right out of the gate is the color coding. See those gold pills floating at the top and bottom? Those represent your buyer's internal states, literally what they are genuinely feeling or needing at that exact moment in time. And that continuous chain of green circles right down the middle? Those are your required actions. That's your tactical playbook. You see, you can't control their internal state directly, but your actions absolutely dictate them.
To make this super easy to digest, we're going to navigate this journey in 4 distinct phases. First, grounding the buyer. Second, the pivot. Third, building consensus. And finally, the final push.
All right, let's kick things off with phase 1, grounding the buyer.
This phase is literally the foundation of the entire journey. If you rush through this, everything else you build is just going to be built on sand. The crucial point here is understanding the duality at play. When a conversation kicks off, your buyer has 2 massive internal goals. They need a feeling of safety, that's step 1, and they need understanding, which is step 2. They just want to know they're in good hands, right? And that you actually get their unique situation. So what are your corresponding required actions? Well, you have to orient them and then decode their needs. If you don't actively do both of those things, that deep internal need for safety and understanding simply goes totally unmet.
Let's look at how this plays out chronologically. First, you orient them. Think of yourself acting almost like a shield, providing a safe, structured environment. You have to establish that psychological safety first. Only then can you move on to decode. This is where you really get inside their head, actively listening and validating, ensuring their internal state finally reaches understanding. Seriously, think about it. There is no way you can effectively decode a buyer's complex problem if you haven't first oriented them so they actually feel safe enough to open up to you.
So, once the buyer is firmly grounded, we move right into phase 2, the pivot.
Now notice the surprisingly aggressive word choice here, disturb. I know, sounds a little intense, but as a seller or communicator, your third action is to literally disturb the status quo. You got to send a bit of a shockwave through their complacency to shift them into a true internal state of awareness. You can't just comfort them forever. Sometimes you really have to gently agitate their current perspective so they wake up and become fully aware of the real root of their problem.
Disturb, reframe. This right here is the ultimate 1-2 punch of any transformational conversation. Because you can't just disturb someone and leave them hanging in a state of anxiety or confusion, right? That's a terrible strategy. You have to immediately follow up that disruption with a completely new way of looking at things. That is exactly how you successfully pivot their perspective from, we have a problem, to, wow, there is a much better way to solve this.
Let's map that directly back to our framework. When you execute step 3 and disturb the buyer, you trigger their internal state of awareness. But as we all know, just being aware of a problem isn't actually a solution. So you transition immediately into step 4, reframe. You're helping them zoom in and look at the issue through a brand new lens. And when you successfully reframe, you deliver the buyer to their next required internal state, which is clarity. Without the reframe, awareness is honestly just panic. But with the reframe, awareness becomes clarity.
And with that clarity fully achieved, we transition into phase 3, building consensus.
This is the magic moment where the 2 parties truly start coming together. If we shift our focus over to the right side of the map, we can see the journey moving away from those abstract thoughts, like awareness and clarity, and shifting into very concrete shared agreements. The green action circles over here, they aren't just about changing the buyer's mindset anymore. Now they're about locking in logistics, shared goals, and real-world parameters.
We see a super clear, sequential flow here. First up, you align. When you actively align with the buyer on a solution, their internal state hits agreement. Boom! They are totally on board. But agreement on its own isn't quite enough to cross the finish line, which naturally leads to prioritize. This step is all about urgency, scheduling, the nuts and bolts of next steps. When you help the buyer prioritize, you satisfy their internal need for step 6, which is timing. You have officially moved them from a theoretical yes to a concrete when.
All right, we've aligned on the what's and we've prioritized the when, which brings us to phase 4, the final push.
Let's just quickly summarize the major milestones that actually get us to this final point. Because, and this is key, you absolutely cannot skip straight to the end. First, safety and understanding were established. Then, awareness and clarity were achieved through our pivot. Next, agreement and timing were securely locked in. Every single one of these prerequisite conditions has to be met for you to execute your final required action. Mobilize. When you actively mobilize the buyer, you finally unlock their highest stakes internal state. That's step 7. Internal action. The gears are officially turning. They are 100% ready to move forward.
Now watch how all of this builds when we view the entire framework as one cohesive unit. Notice the continuous dotted lines connecting every single internal gold pill directly to its corresponding green action circle. It's an intentional, closed loop. The buyer's internal needs dictate your actions, and your actions actively create their internal states. You orient for safety, decode for understanding, disturb for awareness, reframe for clarity, align for agreement, prioritize for timing, and finally, you mobilize for internal action. It is honestly a perfect, unbroken chain of communication logic.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about how this applies to your own daily work. Look back at your last client conversation, especially one that maybe didn't go quite as planned. Did you remember to orient your buyer before you aggressively tried to mobilize them? Did you try to force agreement before you took the essential time to actually decode their needs? Next time you sit down with a client, I want you to visualize this map in your head. Let it guide you chronologically, step by step, to true, mutually beneficial internal action. Thanks for joining me to break this incredible framework down, and as always, keep learning.